Hey, it's Soul. This is the World of Warcraft, and apparently it is like lore week this week in the world of Warcraft. There's been a few bombshells that have been dropped. Well, okay, maybe sort of bombshells. One's a big spoiler, and the other one, which I'm going to talk about, is this whole audio series that was released. That basically stars Alleria and Turalyon. I guess they are now WoW's favorite couple, or least favorite couple. I don't know. Depends on what you folks think. So there's a lot to soak in. There's a lot of information that's coming out of this, and I'm not going to talk necessarily about all that stuff. You can read it, you can listen to it, and getting a TLDR from me would not do it justice. I'm going to leave links below. You can take a look at it, or you can download the script and you can just read it on your own too. I do recommend listening to it. I happen to listen to it, and I think it's a fantastic narration. But in a nutshell, it does explain the whole 1,000-year adventure that Alleria and Turalyon had, and just kind of all the events that lead up to Legion, to where we're at now. Now, from this, the really big thing that I picked up from it is prophecy, and how prophecy is interpreted by the light as well as the shadow, because there are some pretty interesting revelations that come out of it. I talked earlier when we saw the cutscene from Xerath, as well as the Alleria cutscene, that, well, things might not be as they seem when it comes to this whole war between the shadow and the light, and how it's not necessarily a good versus evil. Maybe this is kind of a one ideology versus another, and it just so happens that the folks in Azeroth happen to be caught up in the middle, and everything sucks because of it. To really zero in, I want to talk about this whole child of the light and shadow sort of thing, and all the speculation that's been around just who this is. At first, it was kind of painted early in the Illidan book that it was going to be Illidan, that he is the child of light and shadow. That's what Xerath believed, and she believed that up to the point where she was destroyed. Illidan didn't buy into this, and I had a little bit of doubt too, because Fel is bad and all that, and the Naro are trying to fight off the Burning Legion and everything, but they're not exactly direct opposites of each other. It feels weird that Xerath was like totally off on her perceived prophecy, but at least in the audio here, it does insist that Xerath's strong belief in the light, or just the fact that she is the embodiment of the light, means that she's also blind to the other side. She's blind to the void. And vice versa, the void is blind to the light. So in that case, who is the child of light and shadow? And there's some speculation that it is Arator, who happens to be the child of Turalyon and Alleria. Turalyon, who's a paladin who has been light forged by Xerath, and then there's Alleria, who is, pretty much aligned with the void at this point. So it kind of makes sense. Light, shadow, child. Okay, cool. The math kind of fits. Or does it? To say that Arator is the child of Turalyon and Alleria, that's not in question at all, but to say that he's the child of light and shadow, I'm not entirely sold by that idea. Reason being is because Alleria wasn't exactly born into darkness. She started off, she was born as a high elf, and she was raised and, did her thing, fought in wars. She became very aligned with the light when she started off this whole 1,000-year journey with Turalyon. But prior to that, they knocked boots, and out comes Arator. So Arator is more technically a child of the light, and Alleria, who doesn't have that kind of alignment quite yet. Now, of course, we can get into things like, well, since Arator is like their son, maybe he has like some sort of affinity to both the light and shadow. But at least in Alleria's case, it looks like this whole alignment with the shadow, this is something that was more constructed than something that she was just born with. So I guess I'll cut to the point. What if Alleria is the actual child of light and shadow? It basically highlights itself in this entire reading. Alleria, during her 1,000-year journey, spent 500 years learning the ways of the light, and she might not be as well aligned with it as Turalyon. She still learned a lot. The following 500 years was spent learning in the shadow under the Locust Walker, learning the ways of the void and the supposed truth behind the light, but at the same time understanding that there is a truth behind the shadow or the void as well. So at the very least, at this moment, Alleria is the one person who has a very strong understanding of both the light and shadow, and as well as the backlash that occurs whenever you try to combine these two. Apparently, Alleria and Turalyon can't so much as touch each other without causing some sort of crazy backlash, and if Alleria were to try to draw upon the light within herself, then something weird happens. What I'm getting from this reading is that when the light and shadow collide, the truth comes out, the opening of perspective. Now, we've seen what happens when stuff is corrupted by the void. It's like, dark and murky and madness and, yes, chaos, insanity, that sort of thing. There's a very interesting line that I'm going to read off during Alleria's whole training to become, more aligned with the void, or, just trying to master her new powers. It says here that
she saw war. She saw the forces of the light striking back against the void. She saw a darkened world burning in holy fire. She saw millions of creatures encased in luminous crystals the size of mountains, sustained by the light and unable to die. Warriors of light were monsters, corrupting and consuming everything they touched.
So I know I didn't dictate that very well, but you get what I mean. This is the void's perspective, or it might be a kind of truth as well. The void sees the light as this unrelenting force that's trying to exterminate it. In this case, instead of chaotic energies flying about all over the place, we see creatures encased in luminous crystals. It's like the absolute tip-top of order and perfection, just having everything stand still. But what we're understanding at this point is that when it comes to the light and shadow, there are avatars, there are servants of the light and shadow. In this case, I would say the paladins are servants of the light, and well, I don't know exactly who serves the shadow exactly, but there are minions of the shadow as well. Somewhere in the middle ought to be some sort of understanding, because right now they definitely don't understand each other. Zero was like, oh hell no, don't get this shadow shit in my face. And on the void side, they're like, oh cool, we're just gonna consume everything. At the moment, because we don't have the narrative that brings Arator really into the mix, Alleria is it. I see her as the child of light and shadow. She's the closest one who comes to some actual understanding as to what's going on. This is something that can potentially be passed off into her son. At the moment though, because we're still on the Legion expansion, I guess, it's not quite there. So does this mean we're going to see Void Hunters? Probably not. But do I give a shit about this? Absolutely. This drives the greater story of Warcraft into a basically light versus dark and us stuck in the middle sort of thing. The way I see the end game of the greater Warcraft story, it's going to be not exactly the light vanquishing the dark, but more so the people in the middle, us, who's going to take the leaders, like the forces that represent the light and shadow, and to take those things out. Because it's going to be up to us to just kind of accept one side and the other, and well, I know it's kind of hokey, but that's just the way that I see it. So hey, as for all of you folks, share your thoughts and stay breezy.